Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on rebuilding the team in return. My name is Joe Nagel, Innovation Director at the Innovation Beehive. So welcome to you all. It's great to have you on the webinar today to share our insights into how you can prepare your team to return effectively. I'm very shortly going to hand over to Mok O'Keefe, the founder of the Innovation Beehive, and leave you in the capable hands of Mok and Zac Curtis, our Capability Director. So Mok, over to you.
Great, nice pass there. Thank you very much. Hello, and just echoing Joe, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this morning on this webinar when we're starting to think about returning to work, whether that's planning to return to work or actually you may well be in return to work mode. So on the next slide, you'll see a few of our team. So we are the Innovation Beehive. That is us at an event we ran pre-COVID-19 with our friends at Google. And we exist and have existed for the last 11 years to accelerate the potential of both employees and customers. So we're all about accelerating the potential of individuals, accelerating the potentials of teams, of brands, and of leaders in organization, helping shape those organizational cultures, create experiences and products and services that clients love. And we're very fortunate. On the next slide, you'll see a whole range of different clients that we work within. So we work with clients right from executive education, right from Google, world leaders in innovation, through to quick service restaurants, aviation, media, oil, and think tanks. So really spread across a wide range of clients, helping them to release the potential of their people at work and to accelerate the potential of their customers and employees. Now, we are in absolutely the most unusual, unprecedented, and tumultuous times. But before COVID-19 lockdown happened, we were conducting a lot of research with leaders around how they were coping in the past and how they managed to cope with disruption in the present. Disruption in that sense is with a big D. We were talking about impacts of AI, we were talking about machine learning, and changes in business models. But we also started to look at when previous disruptions had happened in industry and in business, and we looked at things like the Spanish flu pandemic and also looked at the economic crash of 2008 and at previous world stock market crashes. And we started to codify actually a way through disruption and change. And that codification has become more important as we move through COVID-19. There are 4 stages, and many of you will have been on our previous webinars, and please do check out innovationbeehive.com if you want to get more information on this, or some of our YouTube videos. The 4 stages that we'll move within. First was stabilize. What is happening? My goodness, how do I continue to operate business to some extent during this? Second stage we then moved into was sustain, which is where a lot of people still are, and that is around actually carrying on, learning new ways of working together. How do we carry on working through this? And also, how do we potentially pivot and spot new opportunities? And then the third stage, which we're moving into now as lockdown is eased in the United Kingdom and across the world, and that's about returning people to work, whether it's planning for the return or actually the return. And then moving into renew, which is around we've returned to work, we've started to interact with our customers and build our business up again. Let's face forward to the future with new objectives around a new collective purpose. So as we start to return to work post-COVID-19, we started to think about what sort of skills that people might need in the workplace as a result of the experience that they have been through. So looking at the lessons and some of the experiences that our clients have gone through and have told us about, we've recognized 3 big buckets of skills, or 3 big territories of skills that have emerged through COVID-19 and we will believe will be vital to organizational success going forward. And the first territory is innovation. So we have everyone, no matter where you work in organizations, have had to confront many, many unknown unknowns on a daily or a weekly basis. You couldn't have predicted at the beginning of this pandemic the problems or the challenges that we're both having to overcome individually, as teams, and as organizations. So that ability to think innovatively, to be agile, to move nimbly, to come up with new solutions, pulling upon the skills of the Innovators Toolkit, has been a real vital skill to help us move through COVID-19. We believe that skill should be codified in organizations and will help them be more adaptive to the next normal and new phases and new challenges as we return to work and renew ourselves. We've all increased our digital capability. The fact that we are holding this webinar with you today, the fact we'll be having team meetings on Teams or Zoom, whatever it is, we have individually and organizationally a much higher level of digital capability than we had in March 2020. So really making sure that we continue that digital capability push, and it helps transform our organizations as we return back to work. The second piece is, to the right of the slide, is about execution. As we practice more flexible working and more remote working, we'll need to capitalize on these levels of trust that we've built between leaders and their employees. We've stripped away lots of the hierarchy as we've seen each other's wallpaper, as we've heard each other's children or our dogs barking in the room next door. We've built, interestingly, often far more intimate and closer relationships between individuals and teams than we had pre-COVID-19. And there are high levels of trust there, which will be needed to make sure that people carry on feeling motivated, carry on feeling inspired, and feel empowered to do the jobs that they need to do, to carry on with the tasks they need to carry on with, when their line manager or their colleagues often aren't physically around them. And the third territory, which is where we'll be focusing mainly today, is interpersonal. This is about having really high levels of empathy. It's about understanding what's happening for your colleagues and your customers, putting yourself in their shoes, trying to adapt your style in response to your empathetic understanding of where they are, requiring higher levels of emotional intelligence and being aware of your impacts on others, and also using that muscle of remote relationship building. We've all had to learn to do that very quickly, whether it's building relationships remotely with colleagues or building relationships remotely with customers. But actually, a lot of our sales reps, a lot of sales relationships, a lot of customer relationships actually rely or have relied traditionally on face-to-face interaction. How do we, in this new distance economy, build those remote relationships? So I'm going to hand over to Zac now, who is our capability director at the Innovation Beehive, and leave you in his capable hands before I come in at the end and summarize. So look forward to hearing what you have to say, Zac. Over to you.
Thanks, Mok. And I want to just apologize to you all, first of all, because I have some devastating news. You're going to need to help me. I live alone. I'm feeling a little bit lonely, and I'm going to need your interaction in the polls and the chat boxes that are going to come up over the course of this webinar. I'm also a bit worried that you may need to exercise your fingers a lot more, so please give us as much interaction as possible. Whilst this is a webinar, we'd love your input. I'll just send out a message now. So add your comments here, find the chat box. It'll either be at the top of your screen or at the bottom. We have spent quite a lot of time over the last few years working on how we can maximize a team's efficiency and effectiveness through strong communication skills. And we've developed a number of tools to help us do that. And it turns out that one of those tools, which we've been prototyping and testing for a long period of time, has really come to the fore now as we bring our teams back from COVID-19. This tool brings a number of benefits. Firstly, it helps you to know yourself and the way that you yourself approach challenges. It helps you to double check that your progress or the idea or project you're working on is maximized to its fullest. It helps you to see a problem from different sides, the sides of what, the landscape, of how, the plan, of who's involved, and the why, the solution itself. And it helps you to know yourself in order to understand other people. And by understanding other people, you can adapt to others to get the best possible output of your communication. There's a range of tools which help you to ask the right questions whenever you're trying to communicate with someone strongly, so that you have an aligned workforce. And by having an aligned workforce, you naturally have better team communication. So that's what we're going to look at in the next couple of days. Now, I know a lot of you, and I see that some of you on this call have interacted with me in the past, on some of our management programs, and any management program that you will have come across ever will tell you a number of things about the key characteristics of an effective team. And of course, you can imagine they might be something like a clear goal, perhaps a results-driven structure, competent, trained members of staff, which of course I have a personal interest in, unified commitment of everyone aligned together in a collaborative climate, one where there's support and recognition of a job well done. And they're all valid things, they're all great things and very useful things. Some more easy to achieve than others. Support and recognition, for example, one of the most challenging things for any leader or manager to get absolutely right. But there is one item which links them all together, and that's this: communication. The way that the leader, you the leader or manager, or your leader or manager, brings everything together or brings everything to life or aligns people in a unified commitment makes the difference between a high-performing team and one that's not quite as high-performing as it could be. So I hear you say, fine, Zac, what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to cover a number of things. Firstly, we're going to look at 3 principles of something called the Innovators Profile. Secondly, we're going to look at knowing ourselves. By knowing ourselves, we can begin to then recognize how others operate, adapt ourselves so that as a team, we work as efficiently as possible. We're not, let me do some housekeeping first. We're not expecting any fire drills, but if there is one, the exits are somewhere close by you. Make sure that you find where the exit is and then work that way if there is a fire drill. Just joking. I'm just trying to say we're going to have a bit of fun here. So please keep interacting. I love to see the comments coming through on the chat so far. We've got some smiley faces, some welcomes, and some promises of interaction. So let's crack on with the first part, and that is giving you an overview of the 3 principles. The 3 principles of rebuilding your team using the Innovators Profile is that of diverge, converge, and align. Diverge is the part where we understand ourselves, where we begin to really work out how our communication, the way we see the world, impacts others. Converge is where we begin to take those individual strands of all of our team and start to bring them together. Align is where we begin to actually bring everything into pure alignment so we can have a highly effective team. The first stage there, diverge, as I mentioned, is all about knowing yourself. We spend a lot of our time in our own bubbles, a lot of our time trying to communicate with people really, really strongly when we have our own agendas. That's fine, but sometimes it doesn't work out in the most effective way. Have you ever sat in a meeting or communicated with your team in some way? Perhaps you've been working on a project or you've been working on a particular idea and it starts out really well. All of the team contribute to this project or this idea as these post-it notes here. But then after a while, there's some conflict or some disagreement or some miscommunication of expectations, and that idea starts to crumble. That idea starts to not become as effective as it might have been. I'd love you now to take a moment to have a type in the chat function and just try, when you think of a time of discord or conflict with people you've been working with, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced in the way that teams have worked together? So be as free-flowing as you like. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced in the way that your teams have worked together? While you're typing that out, I've got an example, but I also want to just raise on the chat. Someone has asked, fine about the fire alarms, but where are the loos? I'm afraid you're going to have to sort that out for yourself. Oh, great one here. We've got someone messaging saying a lack of clarity of goals. Yeah, absolutely right. If that's not communicated strongly, then there's going to be some definite challenges. Do type a bit faster. Oh God, the idea's completely gone now. Do type a bit faster than you were before. Oh yes, very good, thank you. Different personalities. And I'm sure some of you are looking at the screen now and are looking at me thinking, wow, I don't want to work with that guy. That will be a clash of personalities. And that's absolutely fine. It's how we can learn to actually leverage each other's personalities effectively. More comments here. When you think you have a collective goal, but as you ideate and get into the root of the problem, you realize you aren't aligned. Yeah, absolutely. That happens an awful lot. And that starts right from the beginning. When you talk about the root of the problem, It's that understanding of the cause of the problem, and then making sure that you each understand your own views on that problem. People having different personal agendas. Yeah, and that's true on both counts. That's a personal agenda linked to the problem you're facing, but a personal agenda, perhaps there's something going on in our private lives as well, which is causing a barrier to communication. Thank you very much for your comments. Do keep them coming as we go along. There'll be more moments to interact. Here's another moment to interact. I would love it if you could take 10 seconds to read, so put your glasses on if you need them, to read the next slide when I put it up, and in 10 seconds, count the number of Fs and type them into the chat. So the number of Fs in this slide here, type them into the chat. That's the number of letter Fs, nothing else. We've got an awful lot of people, we've got an awful lot of people double checking their work because they're suspecting a trick. We've got 3, 5, 6, 3, 4, 5. Oh, this is great. Very good. Okay. More 3, thank you. Okay, so I have to tell you, there is 6. So congratulations for those of you who did say 6, but of course that wasn't exclusive. There were a range of different numbers coming through there, from 3 to 6. There was 188, I suspect that was a joke. Some of you are saying, what are you talking about? There isn't 6. Those of you who wrote 3, you're probably rereading that sentence and thinking, no, I still can't count the 6. If you have reread it and managed to find all 6, then do let me know. What's also interesting about this sentence is, have you noticed anything else? If you have, let me know. It did, and while you're letting me know, it did take me a period of time to actually find all 6. I knew about the exercise, I knew about the number of Fs, and yet still it took me several reads to find the number of Fs. We've got a couple of people messaging about a band. I think it's a band. Is the a band? So yes, there are 2 word thes, the sentence there next to each other with the experience of years. And the point of this exercise, which you of course can steal with glee and use with your teams, is just to demonstrate that we all observe things in slightly different ways. We all observe things in ways which we may believe are correct. I might believe that 3 is the correct number of Fs. Someone else may believe that 6 is. If we don't have that shared understanding of where we're going to, what is the goal, and then align ourselves on how we're going to get there by methodically trying to go through each letter in the sentence, in this case, for example, then we won't have the best possible communication because we all see things in different ways. Why is this? Well, some of you on the call, I can see some of you I know that I'm quite passionate about this stuff. So with psychology as a degree and years spent working on persuasion in a positive way in sales, I love thinking about the brain, and I love how all of our brains are different. You know, all of our brains are unique. They are specialized, meaning different parts of the brain carry out different functions. They're situational, meaning our brains react differently depending on the environment or the stimulus that they face. Those specialized parts of the brain are interconnected so that they can talk to each other. We also have dominance in our brain, according to plenty of studies, where one specialized part of the brain may be more dominant than another. We also know that the brain is malleable. So we know that old dogs can learn new tricks, which is very good news for me. Now, I'm sure most of you are looking at this particular graphic and thinking, oh, I know all about this one. This is that old study. It's not that old, really. I mean, it started with General Electric in the late 60s. General Electric set out a range of different researchers to try and build up an idea of how they can align all of their teams across General Electric in the US at that time which led on to lots of different scientists and researchers trying to study the brain. There was one in particular called Roger Sperry, who determined the left brain, right brain model, which I guess most of you on this call have heard of. This is where the left brain controls the right-hand side of the body. The left brain deals with facts, numbers, details, logic, process, planning, and the right-hand side of the brain controls the left-hand side of the body and deals with creativity, spirituality, seeing the big picture, being intuitive, linked to ideas, emotions, musicality, etc. Now, you may well have done this sort of test before. They usually pop up for free in various places. But since it's been a while of you listening to my voice and not interacting with us, it would be great if we could do a poll. So I think we have a poll coming up here, and that is, what do you feel, based on the screen you see in front of you, you might need to move the poll box, is your preference if you had a dominance? If you had a dominance, it's very rare that anyone is equal on both. But I should clarify that everybody, of course, can use both sides of their brain, but it might be that you have a thinking preference or dominance in one or the other. So if you have a look at the words on the screen there, left and right, and also I'll verbally remind you, left brain dominant tends to be people who are more dominant in facts, details, numbers, planning, process, analysis, technical stuff. On the right-hand side, it's more about creativity, imagination, playfulness, spirituality, musicality, emotions, teaching, training, etc. So we've got, interesting, a few more left to go. While we're doing that, I'm just going to pick up a couple of comments. One is from one person who said, just as we moved on from the last slide with the Fs, they just found that sixth F just as we were switching slides. Very good. Now, what's very interesting here, there are a couple of people left to do the poll, but we'll carry on anyway. We've got 50%. I'm going to end the poll now. We've got 50%. Thanks very much, Joe. We've got 50% equal. We're whole-brained. We've got half of the group here feel their left brain dominant, and half of the group feel their right brain dominant. That's quite interesting. I'm not sure I've had that before. So I hope that doesn't mean then that should us together work on a project, we'll have some sort of conflict unless we can communicate strongly enough. I'm sure not. But that's something that we in the business really started in the Innovation Beehive, really started to think about seriously in managing our teams, especially when we return from COVID-19. If you think about what people have been through in COVID-19, they've been through their own challenges. They've been through their own issues and problems, regardless of whether they've been furloughed or they've remained working, holding up the business, or perhaps they've even joined a new team and feel a bit lost. They've all had their own problems. And when we bring them back, that means that they're going to have to learn a new way of communicating, because there may be some emotional barriers or communication barriers which will stop them working effectively. So we developed using not just a Roger Sperry left brain, right brain model, and not just using various bits of research which we took on board and assimilated, but we also used our experience of working with some of the world's most innovative organizations and how those organizations operate to form a standard 4-quadrant model. And now there are, I'm sure lots of you have done different psychometrics over the years, and there's something I need to be clear with on this one. And that is that virtually all psychometrics are based on 2 different theories. One is on the physiology of the brain, such as Paul MacLean, Roger Sperry, and so on. And the other is on a Jungian-based theory. So you may have done MBTI or DISC or various others. And we felt that we wanted something slightly different, but it is based on the physiology of the brain. So you may recognize some parallels to some other tools, and that's absolutely fine. The approach for ours is different. We have this tool, which is not 150 questions trying to analyze who you are and put you in a box. Instead, we've got something which is light touch, which we will give you for free in a couple of slides time, and you'll just need to scan the slide with it's got a QR code on it, and you'll be able to take that for free and download your own 9-page report to give you an idea of how you can springboard to adapt yourself to make the most out of your communication with others. So the tool that we've developed, as I mentioned, is 4 different areas: questioning, classifying, interacting, and experimenting, and they represent the actual brain itself. So you've got on the left here, left brain, that's questioning and classifying. You've got on the right here, experimenting and interacting. You've got a cerebral part. The cerebral part is the big bumpy bit of the brain on top here, you see on CSI when they do an autopsy, just in case you wanted to know. And the limbic part here, which is about more instinctual based thinking. So therefore you have potential dominance in one part of the brain, which is all about rationalizing, a potential dominance in one part of the brain, which is all about processing, a potential dominance in one part of the brain, which is all about feedback and interaction, and a potential dominance in one part of the brain, which is all about pushing boundaries a little bit. No quadrant is better or worse than the other. They're all absolutely great, and they all work together cohesively as part of an overall communication strategy. We originally developed it linked to innovation, how to get better innovations out of a team or of an individual. And we soon realized that it's actually much more powerful to be used in many different situations. So just as an example, some of the, but not all of the words you might find in a dominance in each one for questioning is analyzing, numbers, facts, problem solving, goals, targets, fixing things, theorizing, measuring. In classifying, it might be administration, detail, control, planning, deadline, safety, structure, scheduling, process, supporting, and being consistent. In interacting, it might be communication, relationships, resolving customer issues, teaching, training, listening, persuading, being empathetic, and so on. In experimenting, it might be seeing the big picture, creating, selling ideas, taking risks, visualizing, breaking rules, understanding concepts, using imagination. Start to think, because we will ask you shortly, what your preference might be if you had a single dominance. Everyone is made up of all 4 quadrants to a greater or lesser degree, which is fine. But start to think what might be your strongest quadrant. Don't type it into the chat yet. We'll come on to an exercise about that in a little while. To give you a stereotypical idea about how it may play out, if we consider that a dominance in the questioning quadrant means that you have a preference in ways to measure, if you have a dominance in the classifying quadrant, it would mean that you have a dominance in ways to plan things. If you have a dominance in the interacting quadrant, it means that you have a dominance in ways to engage and in experimenting ways to break rules in a positive way. Now, if I look at something like money, and I use myself as a stereotypical example, someone who has a dominance in questioning, maybe think about money in terms of ways to count money, in classifying ways to save, in interacting ways to help, and in experimenting ways to spend. Now, I have to tell you, my dominance is off the chart experimenting. We have had someone who's made a chat comment. They completed this profile before this webinar, came up as questioning, and they do have a lower scored quadrant as well in experimenting. So we'll talk about how we can try to strengthen that experimenting quadrant for this person shortly. But in terms of money, if it was ways to count, that would mean I would probably know my interest rates on my credit cards. Since I have a strength in experimenting, I can tell you genuinely, and a couple of you who know me on here will know this to be true, I don't have a clue. If it was classifying, it'd probably be ways to save, probably be a bit about budgeting every month. I don't have a budget. If it was experimenting, be ways to help, I'd probably have a direct debit to a charity or something. I'm going to say, yes, I do. And if it was experimenting, it'd be ways to spend. And again, those of you who know me knows that, So start to consider yourself and work out where you think your strength might be. And that's all for now. I'm going to walk you through the report that we'll get. But if you want to actually get this report for free, do get your mobile phone out now and open the camera, hold it over the QR code there that says scan me, and you'll be taken to the website where you can download, where you can complete the profile. It lasts no more than 4 minutes and is quite self-explanatory and straightforward. So feel free to do that, and you'll be emailed this 9-page report, which starts with title page, an overview of the Innovators Profile, an overview of design thinking, because again, we originally developed the Innovators Profile to help with innovation. So that will also give you the overview of a methodology for solving ideas strongly. Then an overview of the 4 quadrants and your profile itself. Try not to see my profile there. And then information linked to your strongest quadrant, and also information on what you can do to strengthen your weaker, lower scored quadrants. And then some ideas about next steps. So since we're giving it away for nothing, you might as well scan it, download it, try it, read it. And if there's a little strand of something that you can use to make yourself stronger, then perfect. Because today, this first part diverges all about knowing yourself. It's all about making sure that you can understand how your Innovators Profile dominance and preference might impact others. For example, me communicating with anyone who has a strength in questioning or classifying. The second principle is converge. Now, converge is that part, as I mentioned at the beginning, where once you know yourself, it's important in order to bring the strands together, that you can recognize other people's preferences and dominances. Now, by understanding their preferences and dominances, you can then begin to leverage their strengths. You can begin to ensure that you support them in the right way, particularly if you're a leader or manager. And Joe's just put the profile link in the chat there as well, so feel free to click on it, maybe at the end of the webinar. By recognizing others, you can really ensure that you can support them, you can really ensure that you can leverage them, and you can really ensure that you can, most importantly, adapt yourself and your communication to them so that they hear your message in the most effective way. And we'll come on to that very, very shortly. And I'll explain why. So the first thing I want to make really clear is your profile is your profile. Even though we've designed it specifically to be light touch, we've deliberately not put it into validation with 150 questions because we want it to be a springboard for conversation. Generally speaking, if my strength is experimenting, it's never going to flip and be classifying. But again, that doesn't mean that I can't use classifying. It means it's like a rubber band. I need to flex that rubber band in order to flex into classifying so I can communicate with everyone else effectively. And you see in the Innovation Beehive here, we use a tool that you see in the bottom right here, which helps us then begin to define what we think the dominances are of the people we're talking to. And we do that by using a range of posters, which you can see on the camera here. So I have things like this dotted around, which I use at all times to help me try and assess, but not in an assessment way, the preferences of other people so I can adapt myself accordingly. So take a look at that strengths poster you see there. There's a number of different words linked to each of the quadrants. You can see questioning is all about reports, numbers, analysis. Classifying is all about working consistently, data, planning, detail, and so on. And you can read through. I'd love to hear what you think your dominant quadrant is. And while you're doing that, I will take the liberty of describing the team. So in the team we have at the Innovation Beehive, we do have people who are very dominant in each of the quadrants. And that doesn't mean that it makes a great team. It actually means that it's a constant change for us to try and get the best out of each other. If we have one person who is strong in the classifying quadrant, we need to make sure that we communicate to them in a very structured way so that they feel comfortable with the information. We've had someone through saying they think they are probably interacting. That person is just so they know, without embarrassing them. That's the person that I used to work for. And yes, I would agree that you are interacting. So thank you for that. We've got another person here who said experimenting. And we know that that's exactly true. So there's again, whilst you're filling out what you think you might be double dominant, you might be triple dominant, absolutely true. You might even be quadruple dominant. But that again doesn't mean that it's any better or worse than any other type of profile. There's a comment here I want to pick up in a moment. Before that, there's someone on this call that I know through business. And if I were to guess them, just while I'll do this, you're doing this exercise now, but I'll just walk through them while I go. So this person, I won't embarrass with their name, but let's just call them full stop, because they'll know I'm talking about them. So this person, I would say, was strong in experimenting. Probably second dominant quadrant would be interacting. They often use visual words. They talk about concepts more than facts usually. They're not afraid to challenge the status quo. They do see new possibilities in ideas. They are intuitive linked to ideas as well. And they often don't have there's sometimes a lack of detailed input. So I would guess that person was experimenting. So if I was interacting with that person regularly, I would try and speak from their quadrant, which is easy for me because I am already experimenting. Good. So look, we've got loads of things coming through here. Experimenting, interacting. There's one comment saying experimenting according to the profile. Now that is interesting because there is a question over whether, because it's light touch, there's a question over whether that profile puts you into a box, or whether it changes depending on the stimulus you're facing at the time, or the mood you're in, or anything like that. Generally speaking, it doesn't change with the mood you're in. If you're, for example, if it's right side, you're right side, but the strength of each quadrant, the score of each quadrant will change depending on what you're facing at that moment. Now, I want to reinforce that, of course, again, it's a springboard for improving communication. It's a springboard for starting a conversation with your teams. Why? Well, because if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. And I think that's absolutely true. If you align people to start off with, then the success becomes easy. Look at any sporting team, look at any highly performing team in the world, and they have communication at the heart of a lot of their success. No one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it. Very true. Quite like that quote. Be curious about your team or the people around you. And you can use this in business or at home. Feel free to get your spouse or partner or family to take the profile. I've done it and it's worked quite well for me. Let's move on to alignment. Let's think about how we've had a comment here. Can I share this with my contacts on LinkedIn? Joe, perhaps you might respond to that in the meantime.
Absolutely. We'd be delighted for you to share this with your contacts on LinkedIn. Just take the link that I put into the chat box and feel free to share it with a comment explaining what it is. And yeah, the more the merrier. It's completely free to use.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe. All right. So in Align, we've moved from understanding ourselves to understanding others to then beginning to align ourselves together as one cohesive unit. And that really involves making sure that we have the ability to adapt ourselves. And by adapting ourselves, we can then, as you can see from the quote there, we can begin to draw in benefits from some of the other quadrants. Now, I've experienced this over a number of years where I'm being vulnerable here, go with me, where in the past, sometimes my communication hasn't been as strong as it could be. Sometimes the way that I operate hasn't been effective because I haven't focused on all four quadrants. I've only focused on my natural dominance. But when I started adapting myself, when I started focusing on communication in all four quadrants, or communication linked to a quadrant that I believe to be dominant in one person, suddenly everything becomes better. My career accelerated. And I got stronger at most tasks, but it wasn't easy. It was a continual fight because I will always snap back to my natural dominance. So my strong recommendation to you all is, regardless of whether or not you 100% buy into the Innovators Profile, with any tool that you get, take some time to make the tool your own. Practice the tool until it becomes part of you, part of a habit, part of your mindset and the way that you actually see the world. That way the tool can work for you, whatever that tool is. And that was quite a late learning for me, even though I've been years in learning and development and HR, because I just thought, great, it's a tool, I'll use it. But actually you need to make it part of your behavior. Okay, good. Why? Why adapt? It's something that I believe I do already, perhaps, but probably actually I don't do it as strongly as possible. Firstly, we need to make sure we can increase our own effectiveness by flexing ourselves into a task that we're doing alone, so that we cover it in all 4 quadrants, and therefore we think about the what, the how, the who, and the why, and to flex into those areas which might not be as strong. We also need to make sure we minimize communication filters. Communication filters we're going to come on to on the next slide, and it's a really fascinating example of how us adapting really brings communication to life. Breaking down communication barriers is important. We can do that using our adaptation. So communication barriers are things like working through Zoom, for example, or feeling anxious, or culture differences. There's a whole broad range of communication barriers which can be brought down if we adapt ourselves to move closer to the person that we're trying to communicate, or people that we're trying to communicate with. That means your message is heard. But it's interesting to just take a moment to talk about communication filters. In this photo here, you'll see my favorite drink in the world, and that is coffee. And I love coffee more than anything else. In this particular photo, they're trying to make the purest possible coffee by having a 4-stage filtration. Now, I've got to tell you that I've tried 4-stage filtration coffee, and it's not a purer coffee. They've basically filtered out all the goodness. And that happens with our communication as well. So I might communicate to someone in our team at the Beehive, and I might have a message which leaves my brain absolutely perfectly, just the way I wanted it to. Unfortunately, as it leaves my brain, it's filtered by my own Innovators Profile. It's filtered by my experimenting quadrant, and it might lose some of the detail. Then, of course, it's filtered through my body, through my tone of voice, through my face, through my words, even more. And then, of course, once it's left my body, it hits their own communication barriers, whatever they are. And then past that, it's filtered again through their own Innovators Profile. So by the time they receive the message, it is not the same message at all. It's entirely different. And we expect people to act on these messages when there's this huge disconnect in expectation of what that message means. So aligning our teams by adapting more towards them is extraordinarily important. And I'm sure that you can see that that works through the filters here. If I adapt my message at the start, if I adapt my Innovators Profile, if I adapt my body, face, tone, and words, it's received more strongly at this stage, which means it's more likely to make it through their communication barriers and their Innovators Profile, because I've aligned it to their profile. That means that my message comes through pure and unsullied, because it's our ability to adapt and engage others which ensures maximum communication effectiveness. Now, do feel free, don't tell anyone else, do feel free to screenshot this page and keep that bottom left icon there somewhere close to you. If you want to adapt yourself, do it. If you want to maximize your communication in some way, do it, because that will lead to an aligned team. I want to just remind you of this particular slide here, which is the characteristics of effective teams. We talked about how, yeah, we need a clear goal. We need results-driven structure. We need competent, trained members of staff. We need unified commitment. We need a collaborative climate. We need support and recognition, but without communication, it just won't work as strongly. So we need to get that piece right. And we found with the profile, that piece does become very, very strong. The other part with aligning your team together is we can't expect your team to align naturally. There's two sides to it. One is that we, if we manage a team, need to teach them. We need to encourage them. And of course, we would encourage you to leverage the Innovators Profile so that they can go through the three principles of diverge, converge, and align. We would encourage you to feel free to take our profile, to give it to your team so that they can then get their reports, read it, understand it, and begin to start to think about the next stage, converge, recognizing others. Now, once you've started to teach your team, it's quite important that we can signal to them when something is happening. And I want to, I haven't checked it with the other members of the Innovation Beehive, but I think I want to raise something now. It was an event that happened yesterday. So I'm with my psychology and my years of persuasion and sales and so on. I'm supposed to be able to do this stuff with ease. But yesterday, I was stuck. I was embedded early in the morning with one particular task, which I was absolutely focused on. And I had a call with Mok and Joe, who were on the call. And unfortunately, I was a little snappy, direct, and so yeah, sorry to bring this up. So I was a little snappy.
Hello, I was saying to Joe, we used this in our conversation yesterday, so it's perfect.
So I was a little bit snappy and I wasn't myself. And, I didn't use the principles which I teach to others. And I could have adapted my communication so that it would have been heard in a much better way. And Mok signaled to me later in the day that I could have actually conducted myself in a more powerful way by using the Innovators Profile. But it's a constant to signal to people in order to keep them learning. So thank you, team, for helping me to continue to learn that way.
I will just say, actually, from a personal point of view, being able to have a tool like the profile to structure that conversation and to give feedback and to hear someone else's point of view made sure it was a conversation that was very timely, didn't take an awful lot of time, and there was, from my point of view, there was little heightened emotion in it. We had a real structure to have the conversation. And it was great just to be able to use our own tools. But I think that it really showed to me that it works and you get to a good place using it.
Yeah, perfect. And there are other things that we do with the team as well, and we do with our other clients. When I mean other clients, I mean that we have banks which have taken the Innovators Profile and embedded it into part of their culture. So right from the start, when they hire new starters, they get them to take the profile. They've got the Innovators Profile posters, which we have all the way around their walls. There's a constant reminder of using it in their own culture, and loads of other companies besides them. But that's because you can do things like this. You can absolutely begin to use the profile beyond yourself, your team, in order to goal plan and set. So when you bring your team back from COVID, you can start to actually plan your team's objectives in all four quadrants: the what, the how, the who, and the why together, so that you can leverage their profiles. You can fill out something like an action planner like this, so that everyone is engaged, because there's something which touches every quadrant, and everyone then begins to have some sort of accountability into it because you've done it with them. The other side is, even if you want a series of tasks, you can write a list of tasks linked to each of the quadrants. So one about numbers, for example, would be in questioning. About planning would be in classifying. About who you're going to involve and how would be in interacting. And then what is the direction we're going in? What is the solution? What is the idea that we're working on in the experimenting quadrant? You can allocate names to it. You can allocate times to it. You can make it as smart as you like. But the point is, you can leverage the strengths of your team based on their profile, but you can also get them to practice filling in their gaps based on their lower score quadrants, so they get used to flexing. And there's one last tip from me, and that is that if you do give the profile to your team, one of the exercises you can do in team meetings, which I've had a lot of fun with, actually with a couple of people on this call in the past, is get them to talk from their lower scored quadrants. get them to use some of the words from their lower score quadrants, talking about any subject at all. It could be gardening, or it could be going on holiday, or winning the lottery, or something about work. But keep it quite light and just get them to try and focus on one quadrant alone. And you can have absolute fun just practicing single quadrant talking. And it gets them to help flex that rubber band of their profile. But there are some overarching benefits of having a team rebuilt post-COVID-19. So I'm going to hand back to Mok to run through it.
Great, thanks very much. Well, actually, this relates right back to the very beginning this morning when we talked about what skills will we need in the next normal. And I talked about innovation, execution, and at the core of that, interpersonal skills. So we're all about thinking about how can you plan your team to return and move your team through return into renew. To do that, those interpersonal skills, how you communicate and how you work together, will be central to building upon the successes, the interaction, the challenges you've had during lockdown, and bring people back fully formed into the organization. The Innovators Profile really helps you as a leader and as a team understand how you think, how your team thinks, how they react, behave, and how to work through different challenges, which we know we will have to face many different challenges, many of which we can't anticipate now, because it helps you understand people's preferences, how they like to communicate, and the filters to which they take your communications. You understand how you work together, and you're able to, as Zac and I learned, you're able to adapt to each other's style and understand the place from which someone is speaking from. This ends up minimizing conflict, and I'd also say emotion in the workplace, and gives you a framework for communication. It really is a powerful tool, and I encourage you all to go online after this webinar and to fill it in. But I'm going to hand back to Joe now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about next steps.
Thank you, Mok, and thank you, Zac. And also, of course, thank you to everyone who has taken part in the on the chat today. So thank you so much for your engagement and for doing the polls and exercising those fingers. I hope you feel very, very exercised. So, you've heard about the importance of adapting. You've heard about the importance of thinking about the converge and the diverge of your team. You've been shown an amazing tool, the Innovators Profile. Now, if you want to go deeper, and I know there are a lot of people on this call who've been in workshops that we've run in the past. There are people on here who have done our online courses, and we have launched a new online course. So Zac, if you want to move to the next slide. When you're ready, thank you. So we've launched a new online course, and it launches today. So you're the very first people to hear about this. And it's called the Innovators Profile, Rebuilding the Team. And what it does is it goes into a lot more depth than you've been able to experience on a 1-hour webinar, into the concepts that Zac has talked you through, into how to use the Innovators Profile more effectively. And ultimately, the big learning outcome of this course is that it'll help you to communicate better as a team. It'll help you to communicate better with your team, to improve their engagement, to improve their productivity, and ultimately to improve the bottom line productivity and input of your team, output of your team. So if you're interested in that course, click this, scan the QR code now using your phone. I'll also send you some more information about it afterwards via email. The course is absolutely bursting with content. There are many, many hours of video content. There are some fantastic tools. Every tool that you've seen on the screen throughout this webinar is in that course, and it's there for you to use with your team, to share with people in your team, and to actually make a difference to the way you work together. Now, because it's a brand new course, as you'll have probably seen online, it's always good to have an introductory offer. So we're jumping on that as well. And we're offering you, as people who've taken part in this webinar today, a 50% discount on the enrollment cost. So instead of it being £250, you can enroll for £125. You just need to use the code RebuildJune50 when you go to checkout. You can use PayPal, you can use Visa or MasterCard to pay. And it's also something that if you work in learning and development, if you work in organizational development, organizational culture, it's also something that if you try it and you like it and you think it's something that could be useful for your team, I'd be delighted to talk to you about how we can support you to roll that out more broadly across the organization. There's a small window of opportunity to equip your team leaders and members of your team with the skills that they need to return well to the workplace and to return well productively. So now is the time to think about rolling out some really powerful learning and development to your people. So do consider that. Take a look at the course, see what the content's like, and feel free to get in touch with me. I'm on joe@innovationbeehive.com, that's Joe, or you can use the email address hello@innovationbeehive.com, which is on the screen, and that comes through to me as well. But you'll all receive an email from me later today, following up with a recording from the webinar with some resources, and also with a link to our new course online. So look forward to seeing some of you in the course. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Zac, for leading us through that amazing webinar. And thank you, Mok, for your amazing input at the start and the end as well. And thank you all for engaging so brilliantly with our polls and exercising those fingers. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.